right, let's get into it, eh? So the title of my talk here is, how to get everyone else to change. It's kind of an interesting, provocative sentence, right? So who's everyone else? So we got to talk about that. But just so you know, setting the table a little bit, there was an intent, right? For some of you may know that this was supposed to happen last year, and it was really kind of leading Agile's 10th birthday party. So we had a plan, we had the bands booked, we had everything locked and loaded to go, and then the world got crazy on us, right? So we couldn't do it. So I'm just paying homage here. It's actually 11 now, so 11 years of experience, but I'm just paying some homage here to the 10 years of leading Agile. So just some quick stats. Like, we've been out a lot of stuff for a long time, doing a lot of things, moving a lot of organizations. I was doing the math in my head. Probably close to, so thousands of product teams that we've helped to form and coach and lead and transform, and then, probably 40, 50,000 people if you do the math and all of that. It's really kind of mind-boggling how many folks that we've been engaged with over the years. So there's actually a dual birthday party as well. This is actually my 20th on so I've been at Leading Agile for 5 years, but I've been in the Agile world for 20 years coming October 2nd. So the first 10 years of my experience were spent largely doing adoption. And what I mean by that is we were focused on practices, we were focused on coaching. This is a prior life, and it's a place where I met Mike and Dennis and some other folks. But it was really about, I came from the XP world, technical practices, test-driven development, continuous integration. Actually, back then we had DevOps, believe it or not, in 2002. We had, the ability to do push-button deployments and things like that. So all this new stuff was being done back then, but it was very much adoption and not transformation. I spent the next 5 years after that 10 years in corporate America doing my own transformations, really thinking about and running into, what does it take to really do this stuff? Like, when you're the person in the seat and you've got to make the change and you've got to make it happen, and HR comes to you and says, I can't do that. Or compliance, or even facilities. You want to just take down cubes, right? That was really a hard thing for a long time. So spent 5 years doing that. And then leading Agile for me in the last 5 years, the pace of my learning, you'd think after 15 years of doing this work, you'd start to amass some learning, and you'd feel like you know what you're doing. And then I started working for Leading Agile, and I realized there's so much left to learn. So what this talk is, this is 5 years of really being in this large-scale transformation work. And I want to make this experiential. I want to make it very much not ethereal. There's going to be some stuff you've seen. There's going to be some stuff that is how you think about things. But I really want to talk about experiences in the field and what we're experiencing, what we're seeing, what we're learning as we learn it. But a friend of mine said, once told me that experience happens to everybody, learning not so much. So we're learning. We're not just getting experience here, right? So that's the value of having people who go through this again and again and actually, change what they're doing. So we're learning a lot, but we have a lot left to learn. So what today is just sharing learning. I'm not claiming that we're all buttoned up, that we're all done, that we know it all, we've got it all figured out. We don't, right? But we're learning. So we're especially with these really, really large companies, 10,000, 20,000 employees. These are very complex transformations to do. Just the math of that is stunning. In my first 10 years, I would have never been able to comprehend the math. I have, to come into a CIO's office and have them say, I have 10,000 people and I need this done in 3 years. It's like crazy numbers, right? That means 3,000, 3,300 people per year transitioned that we have to be able to sustain. It's tremendous scale, tremendous problems. But we're figuring out how to do it. Okay, so who exactly is everyone else? If I did a culture scan of most of your organizations, where the top is the CEO and the bottom is the work surface, those are the people who are doing the things for you every day, right? They're entrusted with, actually, I'm gonna put this water down, that are entrusted with helping to do the things that your business does. Most organizations we run into would be this culture scan. Compete laterally, trying to get promotions. If I help you, I don't help me, right? I'll help you to a degree, but if it's if I don't get the promotion because I helped you, right, that's kind of self-defeating. So they're very much compete laterally, and they're control vertically. And as Agilists, we come into organizations and we've got a lot of morality around this. Like, this is awful. This is unreasonable. I can't believe they do this, right? So sometimes we have this morality that we come in with. And the reality is, it's actually a very logical, rational system to have that control. Because if an organization, as you've heard today, if an organization isn't trustworthy, if the system of delivery can't be trusted to say what it's going to do and do it in a way that's safe in terms of all of the concerns of the organization, it's a very valid organizational design. It would be silly to delegate into a system that isn't trustworthy, right? It would be folly to do that, right? It would be dangerous to do that. So what we find is most organizations that we come into early on they're explicitly, perfectly designed for control. It's not accidental. They have groups of people who've been hired to do jobs to tell other people ostensibly what they can and can't do, and to put those controls in place because the system underneath is unpredictable. I don't know how it's going to work. I don't know what it's going to do. It could expose us to large losses, large risks. In some cases, customers could die, right? As we talked about. So with these organizations, there's a couple different places where all these things tend to come from. We work with organizations. Anybody have a business office or an office of the CIO in their organization? In super large organizations, you'll tend to see these things called Office of the CIO or the business office. That's where all of those controls want to be built and they want to live. So we'll actually create teams and people, and so there's roles, in many cases hundreds or thousands even of people whose job it is to figure out how everybody else can and can't work. And the reason is because there's no safety in that organization. So we have to involve those organizations when we change, when we come in and we do transformation. A lot of times we'll come in as people who are doing transformation. We might hire into a corporate role. We might come in as a consultancy. We want to focus on the teams. It's a great place to focus. But we bypass all of those other things. We don't pay attention to them right away. We treat them like they're an annoyance, or in some cases like they're actually evil, because they don't let us do what we want to do the way we want to do it. That's their job. They didn't make up their jobs. They didn't go out and create their own job descriptions. They didn't go hire. They didn't, they were put in that job for a reason and entrusted with something because the organization cared about it. The other place you'll see it is from other parts of the company. So other horizontals like HR. Very, very common issue we have when we're trying to just stabilize teams is co-employment. So there's co-employment concerns. If we treat contractors like employees, we could be on the hook for taxes, for all of their employment taxes. And effectively, the IRS could make us write a big check and people can sue us. And so it's a big concern. It's a valid concern. We don't like it. We wish it would go away, right? But it's there. So there are other parts of the company or these organizations who have concerns. They have needs. They're valid concerns. Finance. Finance has to report to the street in many cases. If you're a public company, finance has to report to the street. There's rules on that. There's auditors. There's all kinds of tax law. There's big dogs attached to these tails that we can't just ignore. But often we do. We just go right to the teams and we try to do this Agile stuff and we struggle because the rest of the organization isn't designed to do it. So what we've been noticing, especially with these large scale transformations that we're doing, is that as we push the organization further and further, as we help them achieve higher and higher levels of business agility, we introduce these tensions, we need exceptions, and there are opportunities to change. So we create tension with the organizational design. It's not designed to work this way. We need exceptions to go, and there are opportunities to actually make meaningful change, not just to the products and the teams, but the organizational design itself at strategic kind of inflection points in the transformation. So you've heard about the Basecamp stuff today in a couple different talks. Melissa went into a lot of detail about Basecamps and outcomes-based plans. As we're working with our customers to really upskill and uplevel their product teams, we really start to bump into these organizational functions and the controls that they have. So, and the further we take them, the more tension we create. So we had a customer who created effectively a Basecamp 5 capability very early on as kind of a Gartner bimodal thing. And the organization didn't know what to do with it. So we do, we effectively do contextual inquiry and ethnographic research, and we figure out what product you should have, and the rest of the organization's like, I just need the software built. Will you take my requirements? Will you build the software? Well, no, that's not what we do. So as we're progressing, the organization has to progress with us. So these tensions form as we start to push the organization through. So the tensions can be resolved through exception. So think about just common exceptions we need. There we go. Common exceptions we need to form teams. We run into organizations that have shared service organizations, and everybody's either they're managed and allocated based on utilization. I was in an organization where someone had a half hour. It was an engineer who had a half hour of unallocated time. So they allocated him to a project for a half hour every week to make sure it was a 40-hour allocation. So when we want to stabilize teams, a lot of times we're bumping into systems, talent systems, leadership systems that make it really hard to say, okay, these people are on this team, they own this product, right? They obsess on this customer. So that can be really hard to do. And we need exceptions now. We're going to form these teams. We're not going to change the whole system yet. We just need to form these teams in this slice, get this working. Then we'll form the teams in the next slice, get that working. We won't flip the whole organization over at once, because then no one would have any place to go. They wouldn't know what team to be on. So as we're doing this work, we need those exceptions. So as we're trying to break work down into smaller, there's an adage. So if you've watched the show Gold Rush, right? They say they run 94 tons of dirt to get an ounce of gold. That's kind of what we do in IT a lot. Right? Most of our IT projects are about 94 tons of dirt and about an ounce of gold, right? If you actually boil it out. So if you want to start to decompose this work and decompose it by value, a lot of times business isn't in the mood to do that. They're not in the mood to talk about how 94 tons of what they've just asked you to do isn't going to drive the business case. So as we're starting to decompose the work, we might need some exceptions. We might need some help doing things differently than the organization's done them before. And it just, it follows all the way through that as the further we go, the more exceptions we need. Tensions can also be resolved as opportunities. So this is the percentage here. It's a slide from another presentation, but this percentage just means like only 30% of your product teams, they're probably going to be okay with just like being at Basecamp 1. But once you hit that critical mass, your teams are predictable. Well, now you have opportunities. So we have teams working from prioritized backlogs, creating working tested product. And so we can now do some things that we couldn't do before. So as we're making the journey forward, we can actually bring the organizational design along with the mass of the organization. If we try to do things too early, change things too early, the organization won't be in a position to actually execute that way. If we change it too late, the tensions will build up and try to pull the organization backwards. So these journeys need to be managed together, the organizational design. So you've heard about this expedition journey, and you've seen a little bit of teaser on the summits. I wanted to give you this is how it happens, right? So when Mike and Dennis created the outcomes-based plans early on, what they really asked themselves was, okay, base camps first, what has to be true before other things can be true? That's how it happened. If I'm not predictable, does it make sense to work in smaller batches? No. If I'm not predictable, I can't improve anything systematically. So I need predictable. Teams, backlogs, working tested product. Then what I can start to do once I have that working is I can start to break things down. By value, start to look for the gold and cut the dirt. So it doesn't make sense to break dependencies before you're actually breaking the work down. Well, how do you know which dependencies are critical? Which ones to go break? Does it make sense to increase autonomy of the team if we haven't broken the dependencies and they're all locked together in some big orchestrated release cycle? Right? If we're not working in super small batches and high autonomy, does it make sense to invest to learn? If our batch size for learning is 6 months to do an experiment, like it's a pretty expensive experiment. So we need super fast turns on experimentation in order to do investment to learn. So there was the whole process there, and this was fascinating to me when I was learning to think about it when I came to leading Agile, was I had seen and kind of unconsciously known that there were patterns of truth, but I'd never really thought through to codify it, and they really had, right? So these things have to be true in this order. That's really what this is, right? So the teams have to come through the work this way. Now they can come through quickly or they can come through slowly, but they have to be true. So why not at this level? So what has to be true at the organizational design level before other things can be true? That's really where the summits are coming from. And again, Mike, in his introduction, talked about we're just unpacking this work. We're starting to think through this and work through this with our customers because we're successful. So we might actually start, by making them trustworthy, but there are more things to do. So Mike was on a call with a customer, and I heard him say, if your systems and your capabilities aren't aligned to your customers and your markets, your practices don't matter. And it hit me at that moment. That's what we do. Agile isn't the why, it's the how. The why that we align systems and capabilities to markets and customers. We use Agile to do it. And so to do that alignment requires us to go through an organizational journey more than just creating trustworthy systems. So let's talk about this. So if we think about trustworthy, so Melissa went into this a little bit this morning. We have customers who, when we find them, are fairly chaotic, right? They're heroic, their system of delivery. They have very low say-do. The exceptions that they need, and you may have experienced this as well, can we get truly empowered product owners? No, we can get some proxies though. We can get some people from the business to help play that role, but are we gonna actually trust them with the P&Ls? Maybe not, right? Again, we talked about stabilizing teams. Can we work from prioritized backlogs? Can we actually limit demand? So large customers that have 10,000 gallons of demand and 1,000 gallons of capacity, in order for us to have a fighting chance at doing a transformation, we've got to figure out how to actually get them to help us rationalize flow. Agile's not going to give you superpowers to go solve 10,000 gallons worth of problems with 1,000 gallons worth of capacity. So we have to get an exception, or we have to have them help us stabilize demand. We might have to help them stabilize the financials a little bit, how we fund teams. Because it doesn't make sense to go do training and transformation and then cut them loose when the project's over, right? So there's things that we need. But when we get there, when we get to critical mass of the organization, what we've noticed is trust starts to happen. Trust starts to build. People don't trust it when we're starting, but when they see the results, they're inside the machine. It's a little bit like asking someone to describe a tomato, right? Who's never had one, to someone who's never had one. You don't know what a tomato tastes like until you taste it. So when we're asking people to come along this journey, it's a little bit like describing a tomato to them. They've never had one. And so once they get a bite, though, once they taste it, once they see it, once it's experienced to them, they start to trust it. And this is great. This is way better than what we used to do. And so when that happens, opportunity occurs. And in some cases early on, I think we missed some of this, right? Some of this opportunity. We did enough to get going. We worried about the exceptions. We didn't see the opportunities. We have teams. The confluence of our teams are working in systems where they have prioritized backlogs. Maybe we can simplify our capitalization. We can take that data now, and we can actually get much simpler on how we're going to do. So the time tracking thing that we're doing, that everybody's spending oodles of time, and I've got all these scorekeepers employed, and can I now just basically take that data, look at the work item types, and determine what my CapEx, OpEx spend is? So now that I have that capability, and now that I have that trust, if I talk to finance people about that when we're starting the journey, they're usually not real receptive because they haven't tasted the tomato yet. They don't know it. They don't feel it. They don't trust it, right? They haven't experienced it. So usually not a good conversation when we're just trying to get going. But once we've got a good confluence of the organization working in a predictable way, Basecamp 1, so windows open up, right? Probably the biggest one that, that I think we miss is we tend to start in a lot of cases with very proxied product ownership and product management. It's people from the business who can play those roles because they're available. Not necessarily because they're empowered to make those decisions, empowered to obsess on those customers, empowered to actually drive the P&Ls for those products. But once we get trust, and once people start to see, okay, this is different. I see how this works. I get what this is. We can also start to talk about, okay, business, how do we get you involved? We started maybe a little IT heavy on our transformation. You agreed to kind of step in a little bit with us. But now that you see it, now that you feel it, now that you've tasted it, maybe we can get you involved in the transformation too. Form you into our transformation council. Figure out how we're going to get empowered product ownership. Capitalize on the trust that we're building. Become more of a professional product management organization at that summit. Watching my time here too. Okay, so as we're trying to reduce batch size, we talked about this, right? We're trying to break things down. We need exceptions. We focus a lot on those exceptions. We talk about them. We raise them up, right? So gotta stop giving me the thing that's going to cost you $300 million and take 10 years to do. We've got to actually start to decompose that. We got to look at value propositions, markets, customers. We got to figure out how we're going to break it down and get the epics, features, stories, get all of that decomp work done in a value-driven way, right? So cool, right? So we focus on the exceptions, but what about the opportunities? Now that we have the work and teams and portfolios of work that can happen in very value-dense ways, we're good at finding that ounce of gold and not doing the 94 tons of dirt. Maybe there's ways we can actually start to look at the strategy of how we're making these decisions. And so we introduce OKR systems We start to look at how do we delegate strategy. Now that we have a trustworthy system, we don't need just 3 people up here controlling the whole thing, what goes into it. Maybe there's a way for us to actually start to articulate what we want to accomplish as a business and start to delegate into this trustworthy system in a way that so decisions can happen at multiple levels and the organization can move at the speed of trust and not be bound up on 3 people who can make decisions about what goes in those backlogs for real. Okay, so breaking dependencies, again, focusing on the exceptions. We're going to start to extract products from monoliths. We've got things that are 25 years old. They were written and they've served the business well. The problem is with the current environment we're in, like everything's being disrupted. There's very little now that actually isn't being disrupted. And so we work with companies who, stalwart companies, good, venerable companies who've done business, in some cases for over 100 years, doing what they're doing, and they're realizing they can't keep doing that. So no longer can I continue to make the same thing the same way I made it and treat the customers the same way I have. I have to go about this a whole different way. So what we have to do now is we have to start, there's architectural issues that we might run into. Like we're going to have to start to take these products that are all over the organization. There may be multiple copies of that one. There may be, this one might be embedded in a big giant monolith, and we got to figure out how to rationalize all that. So we can bump into architecture, those kinds of things. But what's the opportunity once we have critical mass in terms of extracting our products? We can actually start to figure out, okay, so if you think about it this way, if I didn't have technical dependencies, how would I organize my products in teams? For many of the customers we have, actually all of them, when we find them, even as they're going early on through their transformations, most of them, if you look at the value propositions, if you coated your customers' feet with ink and you had them walk through your products like they experience you as a business, you would see paths across your portfolios, across your organization, across stovepipes, right? So, we have several, customers in the manufacturing world. When I buy a product, I don't care that there's an HR. I don't care that there's an IT. I don't care that there's 5 divisions of IT. I don't want to know any of that. I just want to experience the product as if the whole organization, it's that Conway's Law thing. I want to experience the product as if there's none of that, right? But what we find is a lot of organizations, if you trace the work and the driving value propositions, they're cross-cutting the structure and the governance. And there's really no place where that all comes together so it can be coordinated. So people are tin cupping or favor trading or whatever, or the CEO has to basically say, this is our one thing, focus on this one thing. When that's happening, that's kind of a smell that we're not structured, we're not aligned to our markets and our customers. So as we start to remove those technical dependencies and as teams can start to release independently without having to do big coordinated releases, we can start to look at products and say, there's a better grouping for those. Our product lines, our portfolios can be reorganized to service, maybe it's a commercial and retail kind of setup versus some sort of traditional functional setup that IT or technologies had. So there's opportunities now to actually restructure the product structure in your organization once you can break the dependencies. So increased autonomy. Again, the exceptions that we focus on, some number of teams are going, and some number of products are just going to be so emergent that OKRs are going to get in the way. Like you don't know what you're supposed to do. You just have to get in super tight feedback cycles with your customer. So just get into getting direct, continuous delivery with your customers. Frequent, like we have so Amy Palazzolo is going to give an experience report. We have a customer in Ford who has an over-the-air update group. So driving a Ford vehicle, we want to either add some capability to it, or we want to fix something, and we want to just be able to download that to your car over a modem. Not so much an OKR problem. I just need to get deliver to the customer, and potentially very, very quickly. So PIs won't cut it. OKRs aren't really going to drive it. We just need to constantly be, in delivery with that customer. So drive continuous feedback. So if once we have that capability in the organization, now what we can do is deliver and learn. Start to really improve the learning cycles. So if I'm delivering often, my customers can give me feedback more often, I can pivot more often. So now I have more information about my market faster, about my customers faster, about my value propositions faster, and I can make those changes. So, and then finally, sense and disrupt is kind of an interesting one for me. We talked about invest to learn and kind of setting up those little lean startup-y kind of things, and a lot of companies do this when they're getting into getting into Agile. Sense and disrupt is people think about Basecamp 5 in a very interesting way when I talk to them. It's mostly about product incubation in their minds. I would want that capability at the front end of all my value streams, because we have I have personal experience building a very high-performing Agile organization as a corporate leader that exquisitely built the wrong things. They were test-driven. We went from 2 new products a year to 25 products a year. We went to over 500 releases. Just everything was push button. Everything was, just as Agile can be. The problem is no one wanted it, right? So we actually, it wasn't just harmless. We actually almost tanked the company because we were launching the wrong products really fast, cannibalizing our own revenue. Just kind of a mess in terms of the strategy, right? So that execution engine almost tanked the company. The company actually did have to file, but it still exists. So sense and disrupt for me, you may run into folks who say, I know this. I know what this is. Please build this for me. If we build this, they will come. That's what I heard. And I would go out to every quarter, I'd go out to lunch with my business partner. And I'd say, Frank, we're doing pretty good. And I'd give him all the metrics and, on the delivery stuff. And I'd say, is there any way we can start to help to test the ideas, the strategy, actually to, use these teams to test the strategy? And he would start to read me his resume. Well, Chris, I've been in this business. And basically what he was saying is, stay in your box. Right? Tell me about all the awards he won, all the things he's done. And basically what he was saying is you do this thing, I'll do this thing. So if I had to do it over again, having that capability at the front end of my value streams to go test my ideas, these things are highly uncertain, either a market or implementation. Send them here, right? But actually go have the ability to, with all of this feedback we're getting, feed that back into the strategy. What are we doing? What do we need to be doing? How do we outlearn our competition? Because more and more, that's what businesses are having to do. Not out-execute, you have to do that. But you have to outlearn. You have to learn faster than your competition. And so, so this journey is basically, when we talk about aligning systems and capabilities to markets and customers, if all I did was trustworthy systems, and this is the way we're learning this, right? We show up, we get a bunch of teams to, doing Agile, we're doing, some teams, backlogs, working, tested product. All of that's good, but is the organization really aligned to its customers and its markets? No, right? So then, we start to look at, okay, so what kind of work's coming into the system? How are we making decisions in the system? How are we delegating into that system? How are we organizing that system? So you need elements of this full journey, but both of these things have to change together. So your finance systems, at whether I'm going to change my capitalization, whether I'm going to move to OKRs, all of those things have to happen in concert with the journey of the mass of your organization. One of the biggest epiphanies I had with a large customer we have is when we started, I helped them to create a transformation office. And it was a super valuable, still is a super valuable thing, invaluable thing to help with this tandem journey. What I didn't do was to actually to spend enough time to really get into the business office and figure out what are they doing. And what kind of came into my head, what I kind of learned about that was later on, the regret I had was that transformation office is the transformed business office. I didn't realize that. It hit me too late. What I should have been doing was starting with the functions in the business office and figuring out how to make them end up be the transformation office. So the business office might have been focused on leadership, objectives around, delivery, telling teams what to do. The transformation office promotes leadership in terms of how are you working on the system? How are you making it better? How are you, you don't get to tell teams what to do anymore. So that role of leadership is shifted. So I think one of the biggest things that, on that, if I had the do-over, would be to engage the business office early on and to figure out and to model them. They're really just another portfolio of capability. Their capability is, career and professional development. It's training. It's hiring. It's, outsourcing. It's all the things that a business office does. Even outside of IT and HR, understanding when and where those things needed to come along and foster and support the transformation and themselves be transformed. And what we would have ended up with, I think, is a smoother transition, because what we did end up with was some duplicate capability, some fighting, right? So we had the old and the new trying to do trying to solve the same problems different ways. One was a high trust way, one was kind of the old way, and creates tension, right? So those tensions I talked about, I didn't relieve them by actually moving the organizational design. I created a new parallel organization design, and it fights with the old organizational design. So I think maybe one of the biggest epiphanies I had, and so, if there's one thing you're going to take away, everybody else, don't bypass your business office. Don't bypass HR. There's a time and a place for all of it. There's an order in which this stuff has to be true. Does it make sense to do OKRs if I don't have a trustworthy system and empowered product owners? Probably not going to work, right? I could do a lot of work. I'm not going to get the result. Should I realign my organizational structure to value streams if I haven't broken my dependencies and I don't have a way to delegate into that system? Probably going to struggle. Right? So there's an order in which this stuff needs to be true, but engage directly. And as you're doing it, I'm just really cognizant of being respectful of the fact these people serve an important function. They're important people. Just they have to do things a different way. Right? So when with gentleness and respect, engage them. And help them to then understand what they look like as a product-driven organization. What products do you have as HR? What products do you have as procurement? And how can we form teams around that? And how can we govern that? And how can we just look at you as another Agile portfolio? And usually what I find when I do this is they're super appreciative of that. And most of them, maybe 10 years ago, looked at you like you had a third eye. But now they're super excited. Most everywhere I go, and I talk to folks who are in these business offices or offices of the CIOs, they want to come along. They want to be a part of it. They don't want to be left behind. They don't want to be relegated to the old. Right? They want to actually be part of the new. And so helping them to see that they too are just, they're a portfolio of capability that can work in an agile way, right alongside the product teams that are delivering software, infrastructure, hardware, whatever it might be. So just, it really helps to bring them into the conversation early, to educate them, and have them help you make these changes, to get the exceptions you need, but then to capitalize on the opportunities you'll have to really change the organizational design. Because that's what's going to make it stick. That's what's going to make it work. We were lamenting some things at a table during lunch. Some folks who have some common experience at a company that when they left, it flexed back. It went backwards. If you want it to really stick and you want it to really be, deep in that organization, you have to bring these functions along. You have to bring these people along, and you have to transform, not just adopt. And so adoption's when we take the practices on, but transformation's when we actually change the company. So this is what we're learning in terms of really changing companies. With that, any questions? I got a couple minutes. Yes, sir.
I'm struggling with a term that I hear a little bit today, the term delegate. In terms of agility, I'm trying to engage my knowledge workers, and I want to listen, and I want to serve them. Delegate seems command and control, seems bureaucracy. I would say on your right-hand chart that arrow, I would think would go bi-directional, up and down. Yeah. And the responsibility would be to create vision, communicate vision, and then listen and serve. But delegate, I'm having trouble with that word. Can you explain? Because I've heard you say, or several speakers have said, delegate into the system.
Yeah, that's not accidental. And I think in a prior life, I probably would have drawn the triangle that way. What I've since kind of, my experience and my learning has been, it's a little bit like Zappos, right? When they try to do the flat thing and there's no rank and there's no, you just have teams and they do their thing and leadership, just supports them. What you get is kind of chaos, right? That's the reality of it. Leaders still have to lead. And all delegate is really saying, delegate isn't saying, here, take these work packages, I'm going to have you go do, right? It's delegate decisions, but it can't be a free-for-all. So it's interesting, right? You look at open source models, you've got free-for-all, and you've got like benevolent dictatorship, and then there's something in the middle called meritocracy, right? So,
no, that helps when you say delegate decisions. So you want your knowledge workers to make the decisions.
Yeah, so, speed of trust, right? It's a basic Stephen Covey thing, right? So if and we run into customers that really there's only 3 people who are empowered to make a decision, and everybody else is there to cascade that to the work surface. And the problem with that is those 3 people can't possibly make all those decisions, and they can't make them at a time frame or even communicate them in a way that it's not going to be super lossy all the way down the stack. So the organization puts a lot of structure and people and scorekeeping in place to make all of that happen, especially at very large scale. But what putting that trustworthy system in place does for you, you still need to have metrics. You still need to have, like, all those things get kind of this pejorative taint in the Agile world, but all these things can be used for goodness. And then people can make decisions within an OKR framework, as an example, that this is where leadership wants to go. I'm going to help them get there, as opposed to give me the task, tasks coming from on high, right? We hear that word a lot. we got a task today. A task came down, right? So if you hear task language, you're not quite a trustworthy system yet, or at least you're not delegating into it. But yeah, it's really about delegating decisions within a framework of trust and accountability. Thank you for your question. It's a good question. Okay, I gotta go. All right, I'm getting kicked off stage. I'm gonna step outside my green box.